Have you ever been in a meeting, a lecture, or a conversation where someone used a single, perfect word, and it completely changed the energy of the room? Have you ever read a novel, an editorial, or a research paper and thought, how does the author know exactly the right word for this feeling, this idea, this moment? Have you ever tried to express a complex thought in English, but all you could find were the same tired words you learned years ago? Good, bad, important, very, thing, and you felt like your brain was trapped behind a glass wall. If you nodded yes to any of those, you have hit the C1 vocabulary wall, and today we are going to smash through it. Here is the brutal truth about advanced English. Grammar got you to B2, but grammar will not get you to C1 and beyond. At the advanced level, the difference between good and exceptional, between clear and eloquent, between competent and captivating, is vocabulary. It is the precision of your word choice. It is the depth of your collocations. It is your ability to select the exact shade of meaning from a palette of thousands. At C1, you are no longer learning words to survive. You are learning words to command, to persuade, to move people, to write sentences that linger in someone's mind for days, to speak with the kind of precision and elegance that makes people stop and think, who is this person? In this masterclass, we are going deep. We are not just memorizing lists. We are going to explore how vocabulary integrates into all 6 language skills: listening, speaking, reading, writing, vocabulary itself, and grammar. We will look at how to decode 10,000 plus words using Latin and Greek roots, how to master the subtle differences between near synonyms that even native speakers confuse, how to build collocations that make you sound like you were born speaking English, how to use register, connotation, and tone to wield words like a weapon or a brush, how to read, hear, and absorb advanced vocabulary from authentic sources without a dictionary. This is not a vocabulary lesson. This is a vocabulary revolution. Grab your notebook, open your mind, and let's unlock the words that will set your English free. Let's begin.
Welcome to Daily English Flow. Stay until the end for a special bonus tip. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
This is the brief on breaking through the advanced English vocabulary wall. Reaching C1 isn't about cramming grammar. It's a total revolution in how you choose vocabulary to command attention. It's like upgrading from a basic 8-pack of crayons to a master artist's palette. You're no longer painting for basic survival, you're painting for precision. First, you need a mindset shift to lexical precision. You literally stop reading just for basic meaning and start obsessing over choice. It's the difference between calling a situation bad and calling it an untenable predicament. Think about it. Why did the speaker choose the word exacerbate instead of just saying worsen? Well, you can't just pick a fancy new word in isolation. You have to know exactly how it blends with other words. Second, you gotta master collocations, or natural word partnerships. This is the absolute DNA of sounding like a native speaker. So don't just learn glaring, learn the full phrase, a glaring omission. It's kind of like a social network for words. You need to know what company a word keeps before you introduce it into a sentence. Once words naturally pair up, they become so powerful they actually start dictating your sentence structures. Finally, at the C1 level, the separation between grammar and vocabulary completely dissolves. Take nominalization, turning verbs into nouns. You change "they implemented the policy" to "the implementation of the policy." You might be thinking, wait, so I'm no longer just plugging words into a rigid grammar formula? Exactly. You're making stylistic choices where vocabulary and structure are totally inseparable. Mastering advanced English means treating the language not as a mere survival tool, but as an art form where every single word is a deliberate, powerful choice.
Welcome to this explainer. If you've been working on your English for a while, you already know the journey is super rewarding, but man, it really often hits these frustrating plateaus. So today, we're going to explore the mechanics behind the biggest plateau of them all, and we're looking at the exact active listening strategies that will help you completely smash through the C1 vocabulary wall. Seriously, have you ever tried to express the truly complex thought in English, but you just found yourself reaching for the exact same tired, basic words? You know, words like good, bad, important, or very. It's like you have this brilliant, nuanced idea in your head, but when you actually open your mouth, it just falls flat. You can literally see the eloquence on the other side of this invisible glass wall, but you just can't reach it. Well, this is actually a recognized linguistic hurdle. It's called the C1 Vocabulary Wall, and today, we're looking at exactly how to get past it. So here is the brutal truth. Grammar got you to the B2 level, which is great, but grammar alone is not going to get you to C1 and beyond. The difference between being just competent and being truly captivating relies entirely on your vocabulary choices. Think of it this way. At B2, words are just tools for survival. You want to order food, you want to tell a quick story, or just get your point across in a Zoom meeting. But at C1, words are used to persuade. They're used to command. You are learning to move people and speak with a precision that literally makes people stop and listen. And to get there, we absolutely have to change how we absorb the language.
Okay, Part 1, the C1 listening shift, from comprehension to lexical appreciation.
This is a massive paradigm shift in how we actually hear language. At the C1 level, you are no longer just absorbing the basic facts of a story. You have to actively ask yourself, wait, why did the speaker choose the word exacerbate instead of a simpler word like worsen? Why did they describe a room as having a palpable tension rather than just saying, everyone felt nervous? This is exactly why active listening improves English so dramatically. By noticing these deliberate, artistic choices, your brain completely shifts from passively decoding information to actively appreciating the craft of the speaker.
To really master this, linguistic experts point to a concept called lexical absorption. Now, throw out your old flashcards, because this isn't about rote memorization. It's an immersive process. It's where your brain encounters advanced vocabulary in a really rich, highly contextual and emotional environment. The memory of the word actually gets anchored in the rhythm and the real meaning of native speech, which perfectly sets the stage for active learning.
So how do we actually do this? Let me walk you through exactly how to extract this high-level vocabulary in 5 really practical steps. First, choose a rich, authentic source. Second, just listen all the way through without pausing. Seriously, don't stop for unknown words. Just let the language wash over you to build that phonetic familiarity. Third, on your second listen, jot down just 3 to 5 words that struck you as really powerful or precise. Fourth, research them. Find their context, find their collocations. And step 5, which is absolutely crucial, I cannot stress this enough, use the word out loud in a sentence within 24 hours. You literally must produce it to make it yours. Because recognition without production, that just leads to forgotten vocabulary. Now you might be wondering, okay, where do I actually find the right material? Well, you need authentic content that naturally features high-level vocabulary. We're talking about TED Talks covering philosophy or economics, audiobooks narrated by actual professional voice actors, or even industry-specific podcasts in your own professional field. Actually, British panel shows like QI or Would I Lie to You are absolute gold mines for this. They are packed with wit, clever wordplay, and incredibly fast register shifts. Plus, let's be honest, they're way more entertaining than reading a dictionary.
All right, Part 2, Advanced Listening Strategies, Extracting the DNA of Natural English.
Extracting that native DNA all starts with collocations. These are essentially word partnerships that native speakers use entirely by instinct. A super common pitfall for learners is memorizing single words in complete isolation. But you see, English is like a symphony of partnerships, and learning words in isolation often leads to phrasing that just sounds, well, kind of translated and clunky. So when you actively listen to a native speaker, you really must note the pairings. Like when you hear the word glaring, notice how it almost always pairs with a word like omission or inequality. Or when you hear resounding, notice that it pretty much always partners with success or defeat. By harvesting these full phrases directly from your listening practice, you completely eliminate that awkward, translated sound from your vocabulary, and you just start speaking in these beautiful, natural chunks. Another really cool layer of active listening involves something called register radar. Register is basically the social address of a word. Pay attention to how a politician might read from a super formal Latin-based script saying something like, "We shall endeavor to ameliorate the prevailing conditions." But then the second they drop into the Q&A section, they switch to an informal Anglo-Saxon register and say, "Look, folks, we're going to fix this mess." Tracking these subtle shifts during your listening practice trains your ear to know exactly when and where a word belongs. Next up is the echo technique. So when you're listening to a podcast and you hear a phrase that just sounds incredibly elegant or precise, pause the audio and literally echo it out loud 3 times immediately. You want to mimic the speaker's exact intonation, their stress, and their pacing. What is so fascinating about this is that doing it actively embeds the vocabulary into both your muscle memory and your auditory cortex at the exact same time. It connects the physical act of speaking with the sound of the word. And that right there is exactly why active listening improves English retention so incredibly well. Another highly effective cognitive strategy is predictive vocabulary. Before you hit play on a lecture or an audiobook, just take 1 minute to brainstorm 10 to 15 advanced words you expect to hear based on the topic. Let's say you're about to listen to a podcast on climate change. Try predicting words like mitigation, tipping point, or existential threat. Then, as you listen, physically check off the ones you hear. This is a game changer because it actively primes your brain's reticular activating system to hunt for and retain those exact terms. And hey, as you're choosing all these listening sources, always keep the 70% rule in mind. At the C1 level, you should be aiming to understand about 70% of what you hear in authentic content. Because think about it, if you understand 100% of the podcast, the material is just way too easy and you're not actually growing. But if you understand less than 50%, it's going to be way too hard and you'll just get frustrated and disengage. You want to find that 30% sweet spot of challenge, because that is where active learning and real growth actually happen.
Moving right along to part 3, setting your English free, going from active listening to eloquent speaking. Ultimately, absorbing all this high-level vocabulary allows your own voice to become a true instrument of influence. One of the most noticeable traits of a C1 speaker is exactly how they express certainty using what we call a hedging ladder. By actively listening to professionals, you naturally absorb these really precise phrases. So you move from a basic, yeah, I don't know, to something like, it is conceivable that. And instead of just flat out saying it will happen, you can say, it is virtually inevitable that. It just gives your speech this surgical level of precision.
A super practical way to apply this in your own life is the precision upgrade. Try taking a normal basic survival sentence from your daily routine, something like, the problem got worse, and consciously swap out the words for advanced alternatives you've grabbed from your listening practice. Change it to, the situation deteriorated significantly. Doing this consistently completely rewires your brain and makes the eloquent version your new natural default.
Finally, there is a very subtle technique that all great speakers use constantly, and it's called the rhetorical pause. Look, advanced vocabulary completely loses its power if you just deliver it at machine gun speed. When you deploy a powerful new word you've learned, you need to pause. Just let it land. Say something like, the results were catastrophic. That deliberate pause acts like a gorgeous frame around a painting. It subconsciously signals to your listener that what you just said really deeply matters.
So, the ultimate question for us today is, are you ready to stop just surviving in English and start commanding it? Because vocabulary at this advanced level isn't just a list on a piece of paper, it is a living, breathing ecosystem. And the gateway to it is through your ears. The very next time you listen to a podcast, don't just hear the words. Listen deeply to the specific choices the speaker is making, and let that active listening completely set your English free.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's explainer, where we are tackling something genuinely transformative, the C1 speaking shift. Now, if you've been using English to navigate your daily life, you probably already know exactly how to get your point across. You're doing fine. But today we're talking about shifting gears from just basic communication to true eloquence. We're going to break down exactly how you can transform your vocabulary with 7 ways to master fluency, so that you don't just speak, you absolutely captivate the room. Here's a quick look at our roadmap. We'll kick things off with the B2 to C1 shift. Then we'll jump straight into those 7 core ways to master fluency. After that, we'll explore some high-stakes scenarios, learn how to avoid common C1 traps, and wrap up by looking at how your language becomes an actual instrument of influence. So, let's start with section 1, the B2 to C1 shift, and what it means to completely transform your goals. You know, to really understand where we're going, we have to recognize where we've been. Down at the B2 level, your only job was basically survival. Your goal was just to be understood. You might say something like, it was a really bad situation, and honestly, that gets the job done. But the C1 goal, it completely changes the game. At this level, your goal is to be remembered, to be persuasive, and to be incredibly precise. So instead of a really bad situation, you might say it was an untenable predicament. At this advanced level of mastery, your vocabulary actually becomes your signature. You're no longer just transmitting raw data. You are leaving a lasting impression. All right, moving into section 2, 7 ways to master fluency. Let's look at the actual techniques for unlocking that C1 power. Since we've defined the goal, let's look at the exact roadmap to get there, starting with technique 1, the precision upgrade. Think about a basic sentence you probably say all the time, something like, "The problem got worse." Now let's upgrade the precision. The situation deteriorated significantly. The real trick here isn't to try and swallow a dictionary whole. It's to take those basic sentences from your daily life and actively choose to upgrade just one single word in each. Over time, that upgraded version organically becomes your new default vocabulary without you even really thinking about it. Now, what's really fascinating about technique 2, the collocation chain, is how it fundamentally changes the way you memorize vocabulary. A massive mistake people make is learning advanced words in complete isolation. If you just learn the word mitigate on its own, you're probably going to use it awkwardly. But if you learn the chain, mitigate the risk, mitigate the impact, mitigate the damage, you instantly sound completely natural. Same thing with pervasive. Don't just memorize pervasive. Learn pervasive dread or pervasive corruption. Learning words in these chained clusters totally eliminates that awkward translated in my head sound and gives you that smooth native-like flow. Next up is technique 3, the register dial. Look, true fluency means being a bit of a chameleon. Imagine you have a dial on your chest that goes from 1 to 10. Down at a level 1, in a super intimate or casual setting, you might just sigh and say, "Mate, this is a complete shambles." But if you spin that dial up to a level 5 for a professional office environment, your posture changes, your tone shifts, and you say, "We're facing significant operational challenges." And if you crank that dial all the way up to a 10 for a highly formal or legal setting, you speak with absolute gravity. These conditions constitute a material breach. The core message is exactly the same every time, but your lexical flexibility allows you to adapt to the exact demands of whoever is in the room. Let's move on to technique 4, the metaphor engine, and see how this builds up your persuasive power. Highly advanced speakers know that abstract concepts are super easy to forget, but physical imagery? That sticks right in the brain. Instead of a dry, abstract phrase like, "The economy is struggling," we use a physical metaphor. The economy is hemorrhaging jobs. Suddenly, there's this intense urgency and a vivid physical image. Turning weak, abstract ideas into tangible imagery makes your arguments incredibly compelling and, honestly, almost impossible to resist. Technique 5 is what we like to call the hedging ladder. Beginners often speak in strict absolutes. Everything simply is or isn't. But at the C1 level, you rarely make those kinds of absolute statements. Instead, you use surgical precision to express your exact degree of certainty. Walking up the steps of this ladder, we might start at very uncertain. It is conceivable that, moving up a bit to uncertain, it seems plausible, then moderate. Evidence suggests, getting to fairly certain, it's highly probable. And finally, nearly certain, it is virtually inevitable. Mastering this ladder shows a really deep intellectual maturity in the way you speak. Okay, here's technique 6, the elegant paraphrase. We all forget words mid-sentence, right? Even in our native languages. The difference is that a C1 speaker doesn't just freeze in a panic. They don't fill the dead air with or stop to ask, "How do you say?" They elegantly talk around the word. If you forget a word like ubiquitous, you simply paraphrase it with sophistication, saying it's so prevalent as to be inescapable. This technique proves that you absolutely own the underlying concept in your mind, even if the specific dictionary word temporarily slipped out of reach. And finally, we have technique 7, the rhetorical pause. You see, all these advanced words completely lose their power if you just deliver them at a frantic machine gun speed. The pause is like the frame around your linguistic painting. It tells the listener that what you are about to say matters deeply. If you want a word to really have an impact, you have to let it land. You don't just rush through it. You say, "The results were catastrophic." That perfectly timed silence forces your audience to lean in and truly feel the heavy impact of your words. Moving on to section 3, high-stakes speaking scenarios. This is all about where we actually deploy these C1 skills. So we've loaded up your toolbox with these 7 techniques, but where are you practically going to use this newfound lexical confidence? Well, you're going to use them when the pressure is really on. We are talking about delivering keynote presentations to industry professionals, moderating incredibly tense panel debates with competing viewpoints, navigating a strategic salary negotiation where that hedging ladder and precision are going to be your absolute best friends. giving a deeply moving eulogy or a wedding toast, defending an academic thesis, handling tricky media interviews, or steering your entire team through a crisis communication meeting. These techniques are designed specifically for those high-pressure, make-or-break scenarios where your exact choice of words carries real weight. Next up is Section 4, Avoiding Common C1 Traps. Let's dig into some of the most common pitfalls. Now, I really need to warn you here, because with great vocabulary comes great responsibility. It is surprisingly easy to misuse these advanced tools and end up sounding completely unnatural. The crucial point to remember is that the very best vocabulary is actually invisible. Let's look at the first trap, vocabulary showboating. This is when you use archaic, overly complex words just to show off, like saying, "I shall endeavor to elucidate," instead of a confident, simple, "let me explain." The fix? Serve the message, not your ego. The second trap is a register mismatch, like dropping casual street slang right in the middle of a formal board pitch. Always, always analyze your audience's context first. And the third trap is collocation errors, saying someone did a crime instead of committed a crime. The fix is exactly what we covered earlier. Always learn nouns together with their specific verb partners. Finally, we reach Section 5, an instrument of influence. Let's talk about shaping conversations. Up until this point, we focused really heavily on the mechanics of speaking, right? The words, the pauses, the syntax. But to achieve actual mastery, we have to shift our focus to the philosophy of true eloquence. At this top tier of fluency, your voice becomes something entirely new. You aren't just participating in conversations anymore. You are actively shaping them. Every single sentence you construct is an act of creation that can illuminate a dark subject, persuade a stubborn mind, challenge the status quo, and genuinely inspire action. It requires you to carefully balance art and science. You must choose your words with the emotional care of a poet and deploy them with the ruthless precision of a surgeon. I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to take with you as you continue on this journey towards C1 mastery. Take a hard look at your own communication habits right now and ask yourself honestly, are you speaking just to be heard, or are you speaking to be felt? Try using the 7 techniques from this explainer. Upgrade your precision, harness the raw power of the pause, and step up to shape the conversations that actually matter in your life. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll catch you on the next explainer. Take a quick mental step back with me for a second and think about the absolute last piece of English you wrote. It might have been a critical email, a pitch, or maybe a long-form essay. Now, ask yourself honestly, did you just transmit the facts, or did you actually create an unforgettable experience for your reader? Look, if you're aiming to truly master that advanced C1 level, this is literally the most critical question you can ask yourself. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving deep into exactly how to elevate your English writing from merely functional to a masterful, immersive craft. We're talking about that magical shift where writing stops being a chore and starts becoming an absolute art form. So, here's our quick roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with the mindset shift from clarity to craft, then explore our main focus for today, building deep immersion with sensory words. After that, we'll look at the engine of your sentences, the art of word choice, and finally, wrap up with the major traps you absolutely have to avoid. Okay, let's jump right into part 1, from clarity to craft. Back at the B2 level, your primary goal was just clarity, right? You wanted to be understood, to keep your logic straight, and frankly, to avoid making glaring grammar mistakes. But as you transition into C1, you aren't just communicating raw information anymore. Writing becomes a craft. You start choosing words not just for what the dictionary says they mean, but for their sound, their rhythm, their emotional weight, and the visual impact they leave on the page. At C1, your vocabulary essentially becomes architecture. That brings us to part 2, building immersion with sensory words. Honestly, this is the absolute core of what we're talking about today, and it's the ultimate cure for forgettable, abstract writing. The truth is, abstract writing is entirely forgettable. If you want to create a real experience, you have to engage the senses. We call this the sensory vocabulary layer. The rule of thumb here is just brilliant in its simplicity. Add exactly 1 sensory detail per paragraph. Just 1. A vivid splash of something visual, a striking hint of sound, or something you can touch, smell, or taste. By intentionally injecting just 1 of these sensory details, you stop just talking at your reader and start pulling them completely into your world. Let's look at a concrete example. Take a sentence like, "The office was unpleasant," right? That is a flat, monotone, entirely abstract B2 sentence. Now let's upgrade it to C1. The office smelled of stale coffee and fluorescent hum, the kind of place where ambition went to slowly suffocate. I mean, wow, do you feel the difference there? The C1 sentence uses smell, that's stale coffee, and sound, the fluorescent hum, to make the unpleasantness completely visceral. It builds this rich theatrical immersion that your readers simply won't forget. All right, moving on to part 3, the engine of your sentences. Because you really can't build that immersive sensory experience if the engine powering your sentence is broken. See, weak writing relies heavily on generic to-be verbs. For instance, the economy was in a bad state. Sure, it communicates the fact, but it has zero energy. Masterful C1 writing, on the other hand, upgrades to highly precise evocative actions. Listen to this. The economy hemorrhaged jobs throughout the quarter. Hemorrhaged is just so much stronger than was in a bad state, right? It immediately creates a visual, slightly alarming image that practically demands the reader's attention. Let's look at a couple more quick examples of how to upgrade those generic verbs. Instead of saying someone made a good argument, you'd say they constructed an airtight case. Instead of saying the problem got bigger, you write that the crisis metastasized. Notice how the generic verbs totally fail to paint a picture, but words like constructed and metastasized bring the whole concept to life instantly. Verbs are literally the engine of your sentences. You always want to upgrade them first before tweaking anything else. With our engine running strong, let's head into part 4, the art of word choice, so we can pick the perfect building materials to maintain that immersion. I actually highly recommend taking a quick screenshot of this slide, because this framework is your blueprint for what we call a synonym audit. After you write a draft, go back and hunt down every instance of common, weak filler words, like good, bad, important, or very. Just look at the alternatives. You can swap good for exemplary, bad for egregious, important for indispensable, and very for profoundly. Doing this single exercise will honestly transform your writing overnight. Now, as you do that synonym audit, you really need to be mindful of English's 2 major vocabulary streams. On one side, we have Anglo-Saxon words. These are short, punchy, and highly emotional. Think, the plan fell apart. It's incredibly direct and visceral. On the other side, we have Latinate words, which are much longer, abstract, and formal. Think, the initiative experienced a catastrophic systemic failure. C1 writers know exactly how to balance these two. Use punchy Anglo-Saxon words for emotional hits, and Latinate words for academic or professional distance. And that brings us to a fascinating concept, the concision principle. Paradoxically, true lexical sophistication is very often about using fewer words, not more. It's about eliminating redundancy. Notice how a clunky phrase like absolutely essential sharpens beautifully into simply indispensable. Completely destroyed sharpens into obliterated. Very unique is reduced down to singular. Precision means saying so much more with far fewer words. True sophistication is economy. Which leads us perfectly into part 5, avoiding the purple prose trap. Because as you build these incredible cathedrals of thought, there are a few dangerous traps you absolutely must avoid. The single biggest trap is what writers call purple prose. This happens when you get a little too excited and overload every single sentence with adjectives, adverbs, and obscure words until the writing just becomes suffocating, heavy, and frankly pretentious. Keep in mind, our goal with sensory details and precise verbs is immersion, not exhaustion. One incredibly powerful word per sentence is always going to be stronger than 5 decorative ones. Sophistication requires restraint. Closely related to that is thesaurus abuse. This is when you blindly replace simple words with complex synonyms that just completely miss the context or the register. Like, yes, commence technically means start, but you would never, ever say you're going to commence a sandwich. It sounds absolutely ridiculous. You always have to check your collocations and connotations. Context is king here, and blindly swapping synonyms is going to instantly shatter the very immersion you worked so hard to build. Finally, you want to avoid nominalization overload. This is super common in academic or business writing, where you take a crisp, perfectly good verb and turn it into a clunky noun. Listen to how heavy and lifeless this sounds. The utilization of the methodology resulted in the improvement of the outcome. Ugh, now listen to it energized. Using this method improved the result. See? Use nominalization strategically for formality, sure, but always prefer verbs for energy and clarity. Okay, to wrap things up, here is your actual playbook to use on the very next email, report, or essay you write. First, run a synonym audit to strip out those weak filler words. Second, perform a verb upgrade to turn to-be verbs into actual engines of action. Third, and crucial for that immersion we focused on, add your sensory layer, just one visual, auditory, or olfactory detail per paragraph. And fourth, cut redundancy using the concision principle. At the C1 level, writing really is an art form. Every single word you put down is a deliberate choice, a small act of creation. So I'll leave you with this final thought. Are you going to keep writing just to inform, or are you ready to stop explaining, start illuminating, and actually move your audience with an experience they'll never forget? Welcome to The Explainer. So, if you're already operating at an advanced level of English, you know the basics, right? You know how to string a sentence together, but there's this massive gulf between just being competent and being truly eloquent. Today, we're unpacking the C1 vocabulary core. We're going to break down exactly what it takes to master advanced English vocabulary, and honestly, more importantly, how to use modern cognitive science, specifically spaced repetition systems, to make absolutely sure you never, ever forget it. Okay. Let's dive right into this. I want you to consider this core truth. Vocabulary at the C1 level is not just a list. It's a living, breathing ecosystem. Honestly, if you take absolutely nothing else away from this explainer, let it be this exact mindset shift. Because at this level, vocabulary is literally the substance of your English. Every single word has a history, a personality, its own specific social circle, and even an emotional temperature. You're not just memorizing definitions from some dusty textbook anymore. You're learning to navigate a deeply complex, living ecosystem. But well, that brings us to a pretty massive central problem. How on earth do you master 10,000 intricately nuanced words without them just leaking out of your brain a week later? It can feel completely overwhelming, right? But don't worry, because a bit later in this explainer, we're going to uncover the ultimate scientific solution that literally guarantees permanent retention. Before we get to that, though, we really need to understand exactly what we're up against. Section 1, the massive scale of the C1 core. Let's look at the sheer size of this thing. The numbers here are honestly pretty striking. So at the C1 level, you need a passive recognition vocabulary of about 12,000 to 15,000 words. That just means when you read an article or, listen to the news, you understand what those words mean. But the real target, the active control you absolutely need to be eloquent, well, that requires a working mastery of 8,000 to 10,000 active word families. That is a massive volume of language, and you've got to be able to summon it instantly and correctly. So how do you actually crack a volume that large? Well, your first pillar is etymological roots. Check this out. A full 60% of advanced English vocabulary derives from Latin and Greek. This is basically your master key. Think about it. If you learn the Latin root bene, meaning good, you suddenly, almost magically, have the key to unlock words like benefit, benevolent, benefactor, and benign. Or if you pick up the Greek root phil, meaning love, you instantly understand philosophy, philanthropy, and bibliophile. You see what's happening? You aren't just learning one word at a time anymore. You're actively decoding thousands of words you might have never even seen before. Section 2, precision, depth, and the social address of words. Let's move from sheer volume to actual depth. Now, what's really interesting here is the careful spectrum. If you look at a basic dictionary, all of these words generally just mean careful. But at C1, you've got to distinguish between them. Take meticulous. That's got a nice positive connotation. It means you're thorough and precise. But fastidious is slightly negative. It implies someone is overly fussy, hard to please. Then you have scrupulous, which introduces a whole moral dimension, being ethically careful. Painstaking really emphasizes the sheer effort and time involved. And pedantic? Well, that's highly negative. It describes someone who is obsessively focused on trivial little rules. That's definitely not what you want to be called at a dinner party. So the crucial point here is that using the wrong synonym completely changes the emotional temperature of your entire sentence. And that perfectly brings us to the next pillar, collocations, or word partnerships. Advanced English isn't just about isolated words. It is entirely about the company they keep. Native speakers use these combinations totally instinctively, and honestly, no grammar rule is going to teach them to you. For example, if you leave something out, it's a glaring omission. You absolutely cannot say a bright omission, even though glaring and bright are technically synonyms. You don't hold a grudge, you harbor a grudge. You don't make an initiative, you spearhead an initiative. These partnerships, they are the absolute DNA of natural-sounding English. And just like words have partners, they also have a social address. Register and connotation dictate not just what a word means, but where it actually belongs. I mean, just as you wouldn't wear a top hat while riding a skateboard, you really need to match your vocabulary to the occasion. If you're starting a corporate meeting, you might use the formal word commence, but casually with friends, you just say kick off. When talking about death, the formal academic term is demise, while the slang is, of course, kicking the bucket. Using commence in a casual text message to your buddy, it sounds completely absurd. But using kick off or kicking the bucket in a formal legal contract, that's entirely unprofessional. Register awareness is genuinely the defining line between a B2 speaker and a true C1 speaker. Finally, to truly navigate this ecosystem, you have to master idiomatic and figurative language and do it naturally. You just have to know that the elephant in the room is that obvious problem nobody wants to talk about. You've got to understand literary references, like a Pyrrhic victory, which is a win that costs you so much it actually feels like a loss. Or a catch-22, that impossible circular dilemma. You also need to be able to recognize a Sisyphean task, which is an endless, deeply frustrating effort that basically resets right when you finish. You can't literally translate these phrases, you just have to know them. Section 3, Strategies to Tame the Vocabulary Ecosystem. Okay, if you're feeling a little overwhelmed right now, let's pivot to some actionable strategies. The first major strategy we have is context mining. Listen, when you're reading or listening to something, never ever extract an isolated word. If you stumble across a powerful word like ephemeral, don't just write down ephemeral equals short-lived in your notebook. That's a trap. Instead, extract the full sentence. Write down, fame in the age of social media is painfully ephemeral, here today, forgotten by tomorrow's scroll. The context itself becomes this incredibly powerful memory anchor. It teaches you the meaning, the grammar, and the collocation all at exactly the same time. Strategy number 2 is absolutely vital. It's called the production pressure method. Having a passive vocabulary is basically useless if your actual goal is eloquence. So every single new word you learn needs to be produced within 48 hours to avoid forgetting it. To make sure you do this, follow these 3 simple steps. Step 1, write the word in 3 different sentences. Step 2, literally force yourself to say it out loud in a real conversation. And step 3, use it in an email or a text message. If you don't create this kind of production pressure for yourself, I guarantee that word will just evaporate from your memory within a week. Section 4, the ultimate solution for permanent retention. This is the big one. The constant threat of vocabulary evaporation brings us to the real climax of this explainer. How exactly do you move beyond that 48-hour window and achieve a lifetime of fluency? Well, the answer is SRS, the Spaced Repetition System. This involves using digital flashcard apps, think Anki or Quizlet, that run on spaced repetition algorithms. Now, it's absolutely crucial to understand that this isn't just some basic study hack. This is a highly advanced cognitive science tool that is specifically designed to directly hack your brain's natural memory processes. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how that algorithm intercepts your forgetting curve. You see, you aren't reviewing your vocabulary every single day. Notice how the intervals keep expanding. You learn a new word, and the app tests you 1 day later. If you get it right, it waits 3 days, then 7 days, then 14 days, then 30 days. It deliberately waits until you are on the absolute brink of forgetting the word, and then bam, it forces you to recall it. By targeting your memory right at these critical thresholds, you are reinforcing that neural pathway way more efficiently than you ever could with standard daily repetition. The massive payoff of using SRS is that it forcibly moves vocabulary out of your short-term recall and basically locks it into your permanent long-term memory. It is literally the ultimate maintenance tool. Think about it. Without SRS, maintaining an active vocabulary of 10,000 words is practically physically impossible. Your brain will just clear out what it hasn't used lately just to save energy. But with SRS, retention is guaranteed. The algorithm makes sure you interact with that word at the exact biological moment your brain needs the reminder. Which leaves us with one final, kind of provocative question. As you're building this incredible C1 vocabulary, are you just trying to memorize a dictionary, or are you truly becoming intimate with words? When you combine the rich depth of context mining with the permanent retention of SRS, you aren't just learning words anymore. You're getting to know them the way a master musician knows their instrument. You'll start to genuinely feel the subtle difference between being melancholy and being despondent. So build your ecosystem with patience, with curiosity, and absolutely with spaced repetition. The words will come, and when they do, they're going to stay with you forever. All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into a really fascinating transition. The exact moment where grammar and vocabulary completely stop being separate subjects and actually merge into a single, incredibly powerful system. Look, if you've been studying at the intermediate stages, you probably learned grammar rules in one chapter of your textbook, right? And then you memorized vocabulary lists in a totally different one. But today, we're going to look at how that entire paradigm completely changes when you hit the advanced C1 level. I absolutely love this quote. At C1, grammar and vocabulary are no longer two separate rivers. They are one ocean. Let's really dive into this profound shift, because at the advanced level, you aren't just applying rigid, isolated rules anymore. You're actually making stylistic choices. Your words dictate your structure, and your structure literally determines which words are even possible. Vocabulary and grammar become completely, totally inseparable. And I think this example just brilliantly illustrates the difference. Take a look at the basic B2 sentence at the top. I mean, it gets the job done, right? It communicates a fact. But then look at the advanced C1 version right below it. We aren't just communicating a fact anymore, we are actively sculpting it for maximum rhetorical drama using an integrated toolkit. Notice how the advanced vocabulary, words like catastrophic and judgment, perfectly lock in with that complex grammatical structure. They just belong together. Point 1. Nominalization and academic vocabulary. This is the absolute hallmark of academic and formal English. If you want to sound authoritative, this is exactly where you start. The crucial thing to understand here is that by transforming actions and descriptions into concrete concepts, which is really all nominalization is, you instantly elevate your language. You're shifting the focus away from who is doing what and zooming out to the overarching concepts themselves. And that is exactly what academic writing demands. So watch how basic verbs and adjectives morph into advanced nouns here. Instead of saying someone implemented something, we use implementation. Instead of saying things deteriorated, we talk about the deterioration. And instead of the adjective ambiguous, we use the noun ambiguity. The entire vibe of the sentence shifts from conversational to highly professional just by tweaking the word form and adjusting the grammar around it. It's a real game changer. Point 2. Inversion and rhetorical drangar. This tool is all about weaponizing your grammar to deliver a serious rhetorical punch. Inversion is, well, exactly what it sounds like. You're flipping the standard subject-verb order and sticking the auxiliary verb before the subject. You do this when you want to be dramatic or really hammer a point home. But here's the secret sauce. The grammar alone just isn't enough. Your vocabulary has to match that exact level of intensity. Check this out. Notice how a heavy-hitting word like capitulate, which means to surrender under very specific conditions, is absolutely inseparable from the inverted structure, under no circumstances should we. You wouldn't use a dramatic inversion just to say, under no circumstances should we give up. It falls flat. The grammar creates the stage, and the high-level vocabulary delivers the drama. They work as a cohesive team. Point 3. Participle clauses and lexical compression. Now, when you want to pack a massive amount of context into a single, flowing sentence, this is what you reach for. See how the phrase at the very beginning, having exhausted all diplomatic avenues, sets up this really complex backstory elegantly? It allows the main part of the sentence to strike with precise, register-appropriate action. It's concise, it's highly advanced, and it literally forces you to use precise vocabulary like exhausted and avenues to carry the weight of all that compressed information. Point 4. The subjunctive and formal vocabulary. If you're ever writing a business proposal, a legal document, or an academic paper, you're going to need this. The subjunctive mood is a classic C1 structure. But remember our theme here today. It's not just a grammar rule floating in a vacuum. The subjunctive only actually works because it pairs with a very specific set of formal verbs and adjectives that trigger its use. Without the right vocabulary, the grammar just doesn't activate. Seriously, if you want to master the subjunctive, you absolutely need to memorize these lexical triggers. Words like imperative, crucial, insist, and require. Using these specific words acts like a key. It unlocks the subjunctive mood, forcing the rest of your sentence into that highly formal grammatical mold. Point 5. Advanced conditionals and nuanced vocabulary. We all know standard if-then statements, sure, but at C1, complex what-ifs meet highly nuanced language. Look closely at this sentence. An advanced conditional framework like but for, which is just a much more sophisticated way of saying if it were not for, requires equally evocative vocabulary to actually pull it off. You pair it with phrases like courageous disclosure and concealed indefinitely. You definitely wouldn't say, but for the guy talking, the bad stuff would stay hidden, right? The advanced structure demands advanced vocabulary. Point 6. Practicing the merge with integration drills. So, how do we train ourselves to think like linguistic artisans and put all this theory into practice? Well, the transformation drill is how you do it. You take a single, basic idea, like the simple sentence at the top, and you actively sculpt it through 4 different C1 structures. Notice how the vocabulary has to completely change to fit each specific grammatical choice, from bad decisions to poor decision-making, all the way to ill-advised decisions. Doing this drill wires your brain to see the ocean, not just the isolated rivers. Now, even master sculptors make mistakes, so let's hit pause for a second and look at the most common pitfalls you need to avoid when you're out there trying to merge lexis and syntax in the real world. First up, you have to avoid what we call register collision. This is that jarring, totally awkward effect you get when you mix a highly formal grammatical structure, like inversion, with super informal slang. Under no circumstances is incredibly formal. Freaking bail is incredibly casual. Smashing them together just sounds, well, totally unnatural. Always, always match your grammar to your vocabulary. Next up is the classic dangling participle. You always got to ensure the subject of your participle clause matches the subject of your main clause. In the bad example here, if you read it literally, you end up with a hilarious scenario where the deadline is magically finishing the report. The good example fixes this simply by making the team the subject of the main action. Much better. And definitely watch out for subjunctive confusion. Remember those trigger words we talked about earlier? After a trigger word like suggest, you must use the base form of the verb for the following subject. You literally strip away the standard conjugation. So it's not he goes, it is he go. Now, I know it might feel a little strange in your mouth at first, but it is the absolute hallmark of precise, advanced English. Point 7. Sculpting your English for mastery and eloquence. As we wrap up this explainer, let's just step back and look at what this all truly means for your fluency. The paradigm has completely shifted. At C1, you aren't just laying grammatical bricks anymore, crossing your fingers and hoping the wall stands up. You're choosing the exact word, the exact rhythm, and the exact register to create a precise artistic effect. You finally have the tools to manipulate language to do exactly what you wanted to do. Embrace the complexity. Really revel in the precision of this integrated ocean of grammar and vocabulary. And as you go about using your English today, I want to leave you with this question to ponder. How will you turn your English from a mere tool for communication into an actual art form today? What exact effect will you sculpt with your next sentence?